Hello, hello. Today's Thursday. That means I'm ready to welcome you on Sustainability Explored FM. Every week, this podcast navigates a new topic through the interviews with the most disruptive minds in sustainability, turning their experiences, their background, their inspiration, and insights into actionable advice you can use in your life, no matter your background. My name is still Anna. I am an environmentalist, sustainability consultant, and the host of this show. And today with me, I have Jack Kennedy. He is a founder and main inspirer of the company called Dodo or Dodo Eco. This is how you will find them on the internet. We will be talking about climate neutrality and climate positive actions, what it means in essence, how to reach this ambitious goal. We will talk about in a second. Jack, I'm super happy to welcome you on Sustainability Explored podcast. I used to call it Sustainability Explored FM. Today, we're talking with you about your company, Dodo or Dodo Eco. You will eliminate my confusion in a second, and what it means to be climate positive. But let's start with this. There is an idea that a good business idea is always born out of some challenge and difficulty that needs to be solved. How did you see the opportunity? And what is the
Yeah,
company about?
great questions, and yeah, thanks very much for having me on. First and foremost, what we encountered at the very beginning was a problem where lots of companies now want to become carbon neutral or to sort of tackle their emissions, but it is incredibly hard for these companies to understand what to do. I think in particular, sort of smaller companies in industries that have never had to do this before, the level of education needed to sort of understand and how to reduce your emissions is quite massive. And I can sort of go through the details, but we help to sort of reduce that barrier.
I feel like for people it's hard to understand, like CO2, what is it? It's a gas, it's transparent. We don't know how to capture it, how we don't see it. How did you get over that kind of a perception barrier? What are we even fighting against?
Yeah, climate change is in general is such a sort of a difficult problem to grasp, I think, for a lot of people. And I think especially in what is a ton of CO2, even when we sort of guide our clients through that process, it's still very hard to grasp that concept. But if there's a very good image of what a ton of CO2 is. If your viewers or listeners even sort of Google that, they can see this bubble, and it's quite a massive bubble of what actually a ton of CO2 is. But what we do is we try and make it a lot easier. So once we have measured emissions for our clients, it follows the sort of story: what gets measured gets done. So once they're able to see, okay, as a business, we emit 100 tons of CO2 a month. What we also do is provide them with sort of equivalents. So we say, that's enough to drive, 2,000 miles in a car, or it's 7 long haul flights, or enough to power a building for a year. So we're trying to sort of bring it down to the tangible level and make it something that people can take action on, which I think is one of the biggest challenges, and it's the biggest opportunities as well for companies to show to clients.
Right. Could you walk us through how the company really works? What is this service? I checked the website and I see you have a breakdown of certain industries, like say you're working in the banking sector or in the education, and then you choose how many employees you have. And then what happens? How does it work? In essence, how much does it cost to use it?
Yeah, for sure. What we actually have is one public product, and we're working on another product in the background, which is really sort of where our innovation is happening. So our first product that you see on our website is called the starter product, and what we've done is pre-estimate emissions for certain industries. So we've gone to these public I guess documents that companies have launched, and we said, okay, if you're in this industry, we know that you typically have these emissions, and we break it down on a per employee basis. So you're able to come in as a company, choose your industry, choose how many employees you have, and we will say roughly that's going to be around 2 tons of CO2 that we think your business is emitting every month. And then what the company does is subscribe to a monthly subscription to offset that. And really, I mean, carbon offsets again is another very interesting topic, and it's can be quite controversial. But what we've done is source a level of these carbon offsets, which just means that you're capturing the CO2 that your business has emitted. So every month that your company is sort of operating and paying the sort of subscription, we are putting 90% of that revenue into these carbon offsets to make your company carbon neutral or climate positive, as we say.
What kind of carbon offsetting ways or means are there?
Yes, great question. There's a lot, and I think one of the big things with carbon offsets is that there's no silver bullet. There is no single solution that we can use to help solve climate change, and unfortunately, that makes it a more fragmented market. But we need to have a multitude of solutions to try and solve this problem. So the obvious carbon offset is tree planting, which a lot of people would probably know about. But what we found is it can take, say, 5 to 10 years for a tree to actually reach that maturity for it to capture enough CO2. So it's definitely more of a longer term solution. And as we know, by 2030, we need to sort of half all of our emissions to reach our emissions goals. So what we also do is provide other projects. So we invest in peatland protection. We also invest in reforestation, in tree planting, but we also might invest in, say, methane capture, which is a very intensive greenhouse gas. So we have a portfolio of projects that we invest in on companies' behalf, which hopefully will try and have a short and longer term impact and to reach our sort of global goals on top of that as well.
I saw on the website at least the website showed me 4 projects, and all of them look very exotic. Amazon rainforest. What was there as well?
We have one in Colorado at the moment, I think, as well, and one in Indonesia, which we sort of sourced with sort of a partnership.
Mm-hmm. And how did you select these projects? Exactly these projects to help companies put their CO2 in those projects, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have no sort of formal agreement with any of the carbon offsets, so that allows us to source the projects that we think are the best and the most efficient in terms of removing these emissions. I think for companies, becoming carbon neutral is obviously an additional cost. There's a huge amount of benefits coming from it as well, around sort of employee retention and brand proposition, aside from doing just the right thing as a company. But what we've done is source these companies or these projects based on what we think is going to drive the most impact. And again, sort of looking at the sort of cost point of view, also, we want to make it affordable for businesses, but also manage that with the right level of certification for these projects. So they are all triple verified, and they are sort of looking out for a lot of these things, not just in reducing emissions, but also in sort of helping job creation, improving water quality, so along with the sort of UN Sustainable Development Goals as well. So we source these projects for a couple of different reasons, and once the offsets sort of run out in these projects, then we'll look at other projects that we can bring in. So it allows us to be quite flexible in what we're actually investing in on behalf of our clients.
Earlier, you said something that I also truly believe in. You cannot change what you don't measure. You cannot fix what you don't really measure. You don't know what's going on. My first question regarding that is, how do you said you used public information to understand in terms of CO2, the emissions in every sector. Let's take an example. Let's take an educational service or something simple as this podcast. Say I have 5 people working on it. What kind of carbon emissions in our actions we are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it leads us into, I think, our second product, lucky enough, which is the one that we're developing with a few pilot clients at the moment. So we haven't sort of publicly launched this, but what we do is we connect in with accounting software. which gives us, as this podcast gives us a lot of the data that we need to measure your actual emissions. So on our website, we sort of pre-estimated the emissions, and in our pilot product, we're actually generating what your actual emissions are. So if we took this podcast as an example, a lot of companies think that if they don't make a product, how do they have emissions? And I think it's a very interesting thing to then be able to show them actually this is where your emissions come from. So what we do is we take down these accounting expenses. So you might have expenses on something like Zoom or Slack. You might have expenses for Ubers, for meals, even for your laptop. And we've also sort of estimated what your working from home emissions would be also. So we're able to take all of these expenses as part of your business and then convert them into emissions. So the biggest ones for companies who don't make a product would be sort of their travel, meal, entertainment. But then there'd be the electricity that they use, any building costs they have, right down to the sort of the technology they're using, even accountants that they might purchase. So there's always this corresponding emissions factor with that. So for a company, it's very difficult to try and estimate what these emissions are, but with us and our ability inside our platform, we can generate the emissions for a part of the business in just a few minutes through this accounting integration, which we're very much looking forward to launching in the next few weeks.
Wow, awesome. I guess, yes, there is this big black hole of understanding really how do I translate me sitting here in this chair into CO2 that I cannot even touch, you know? And I guess
Yeah.
there is a need for kind of an educational field in that area. Like, okay, but even the electricity that you mentioned, the type of electricity, where it's coming from, is it from coal, from gas, from, I don't know, aeolian, the wind farms, and so on, that it also plays a role in the CO2. Does it also go into the accounting, the type of electricity? Is it that accurate?
Not that. So I mean, as you said, for some of these companies, they've started with nothing, and so what we want to do is put them on that very first step and say, at least you know what your emissions are as part of the business, and then over time we can start to develop the platform, which would be very, very accurate. So we can say if you actually are based in the UK or you're based elsewhere, we know what the energy breakdown is of that country, and so then we can start estimating that as well. But I think over time, that's something we're definitely looking into to sort of give that level of detail. But as a very first step, companies need to even know what their emissions are across the board, and then we sort of give them that platform to then drill down into. Is my I guess a big question that comes up is my electricity even renewable? We don't know for some people who are in the building. So the sort of data that we give them and the insights helps sort of kickstart that conversation internally as part of the organization to see, okay, now we know where our emissions are coming from, what can we do about it, and how can we reduce them over time?
I'm getting excited when you talk about it. I'm also curious. Okay, for real, what do I produce in terms of CO2? Your
Mm.
product, is it only for companies, or individuals can also estimate their own CO2 footprint?
We're primarily focused on companies. So from a B2B point of view, the reason being, I think we've seen a lot of sort of carbon calculators out there for individuals, and I think they're absolutely fantastic. But we saw from a B2B point of view that their employees are sort of pressurizing them to have a sustainability journey, I think, especially for younger generations. So to remain competitive in both attracting and retaining talent, it's quite important. You might have some companies whose investors are asking them what their emissions are. And from what
Yeah.
we've seen from our clients also, some of their buyers, so some of the people that they're selling their businesses to, are asking them what their emissions are as part of their sort of global strategy. So we see and have seen a lot of pressure on companies, and it's one that we want to sort of solve the pain for. We also have just launched another product also, so we've been quite busy, but it allowed the companies to then match any donations that their employees make to their carbon footprint. So while we don't offer it directly to everyone, individuals, we do offer to businesses who can then sort of match what their employees are donating for their personal carbon footprint. So the company as a whole can offset their entire company and their employees as well.
Mhm. How much does the service cost?
Service, I mean, we're still early days, and so we're looking for partners. So if you go onto our website, you have the sort of pre-estimated version. So you just pay per employee, and we charge 10% fee just to run our costs, and 90% goes into the projects. If you're looking at the sort of accounting integration service that we run here in the background, we're charging anywhere for sort of 50 to 200 pounds based on the company size. So I mean, we're very flexible. We'd love a lot of feedback. So anything that can be done, if it is a company that's interested, we'd love to work with anyone just to develop that product further.
How this idea was born in general? How did you just wake up one day and said, CO2, I don't really like it. What can I do about it? How did
For
it
sure, I
happen?
think I've always been very much interested in the environmental side. And I think back when I was younger, I always wanted to be a vet to work with animals. So that whole process around kind of biodiversity and the environment has always been top of mind. I think in my last job, I worked in a financial technology startup here in London, and we used banking data, so open banking and available in the UK, to actually credit score people who couldn't get access to credit. So it was primarily focused on the gig economy because their income was fluctuating so much. So I kind of merged two things together. It was my sort of interest in the environment and how can we use data to solve a problem. And they kind of merge into one to how can we use existing company data, such as accounting information, to help companies measure their emissions and then to reduce them. So it was sort of a convergence of two big themes in my life at the time.
How big was the team at start?
We it was just my co-founder and I. So we met back in March, and we had 2 weeks working together on the problem before we went into full national lockdown. And since then, we've been working fully remote. And we just brought on two further people back in September on the data science part and the marketing part to sort of bolster our team. So I think in the new year, we're sort of looking to raise our funding round and hopefully expand the team further and obviously expand the product reach as well within that. So it's exciting times for us.
I am curious, have you already calculated your own company's CO2 emissions?
We have. We are lucky enough that again we're all remote, but we also have a calculation around working from home emissions generally, so an estimation within that. But we do calculate our emissions as a company, and we do offset them as a company. And I think if we are to sell this to companies, we need to test it out ourselves and believe in the product ourselves. So we're very much interested in offsetting and sort of managing our own carbon footprint, as it were, as well.
That's awesome. I have a question. Carbon neutral versus climate positive. On Twitter and on your website, you say helping companies to become climate positive. I'm confused. Like on the perception level, it feels like being carbon neutral is already great. Climate positive, probably it comes together with the rising of the temperature, so it's going into more into plus. And when you say climate positive, I'm like, I don't know how to react. My brain is torn between the two. Can you tell me and the listeners what is the main difference between climate neutral, climate positive, and what is the best out of these two options?
Yes, it's confusing for sure. So carbon neutral is essentially means that you capture the exact same amount of CO2 that you've released as a company. So if you have released 100 tons of CO2 in the last month, you have captured 100 tons. Where the confusing part comes in is carbon negative and carbon positive or climate positive, as sort of we put in that, are actually all the same things. What they mean is you're doing more than what you're capturing more CO2 than you have emitted. So if you've emitted 100 tons, you might capture 120 tons. And so that makes you carbon negative, means that you're taking more out than you've emitted, or carbon positive. So they're interchangeable. I think where we sort of thinking about with the climate positive is sort of a bit more, or I guess why we like it a bit more is, it's a problem out there. Climate change is a problem that is becoming more and more pressing to solve, and I think there's a lot of negativity out there. And I think where our point of view is that it's actually quite easy when sort of you use a sort of technology at least to generate your emissions and to do something. And we wanted to put a more positive spin on that and to say, it is a problem that can be solved if enough companies sort of bond together to do this. So that's where we want to say climate positive. We wanted people to take action, and we want people to do more and to capture more CO2 than they have emitted. So I guess in short, they all sort of mean the same things, but it's a sort of a step in the right direction, really.
The name of the company, now that you're talking about positivity, I cannot help myself but wonder, is it by accident that you used the name of the bird that went extinct in 1600s?
I think maybe it might be sort of construed as being quite negative, but we chose the name Dodo because I think, first of all, it's nice and short, I guess, also, but it is the sort of example that everyone uses as the first known example of human-made extinction or human-caused extinction of something, and since there we've sort of gone on a spree of making a lot of different species and biodiversity extinct. So we wanted to choose that, and we wanted to choose it as a sort of a statement. We know this exists. We know this has happened in the past, and we want to reverse that trend. We want to do something about it. And so we chose Dodo as, it for sure is sort of a negative connotation, but it's a marker in the line to say we can take a stand and actually help reverse those effects of climate change. So we chose it for those reasons, and I think we want to maybe spin it into a more positive action rather than the sort of negative message that it does come across as.
The message is not negative. It's just like, wait, do these guys do something about biodiversity, or am I confused again?
For
Dodo.
sure, yeah.
The vision of the company is to offset or reduce, reduce 1% of the world's CO2 emissions by 2025. That's in 4 years. Isn't it a little bit too ambitious? How is it going? And the company, you said the company was created in 2020, beginning of
Yeah,
2020.
exactly. So we incorporated the company back in June. So we're still very early stages, and we're sort of working away with a few clients. But I think our vision is definitely over ambitious. Where I think it's a good statement for what we want to do, and I think if we get enough companies on board, we can sort of reach those targets. So we're now capturing in the hundreds of tons as a company, and with the companies that we're working for. So just in a few short months, we've been able to do that. So we're sort of slowly getting to our goal of getting there, where we're hopefully to capture 400 million tons. So longer term, we're looking at not just carbon offsets, but also helping companies use that data to actually see how they can reduce their emissions also. So through a combination of sort of carbon offsets, which may or may not be in the full focus in the next 10 years. We also want to help companies to reduce those emissions using the data that we have, and the best sort of or form of carbon offset is to not release those emissions in the first place. So that's where we want to focus. But yeah, that's our ambition in the next 4 years, is trying to get that to that level.
Yes, it's very important that you mention it. I was thinking a lot in the past days about waste management. Everybody is running around. Are you sorting? Are you recycling? I'm like, guys, wait, stop for a second. Instead of recycling and overwhelming yourself about recycling in Ukraine and many other countries in the Balkans, it does not happen. So how about we ask ourselves how we don't produce in the first place? How do we go as much as possible zero waste? How do we go, I don't know, solid shampoos? How do we go composting? And this is, I think, it as how do you call it, like a mental shift, is not to produce rather than, oh, let's do something about it, shall really go first. Whatever we are talking about, waste management or carbon offsetting, how do we not produce instead of what to do with
Exactly.
it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a shift that has been happening, I think, in the last few years. Um, yeah, I think I mentioned there's no sort of silver bullet to solving this problem, and waste and recycling and all of that is incredibly important. We do need to get into this sort of circular economy. But it is the case that I think people focus in on you know, sort of buying these keep cups or reusable bags, and it is literally a fraction of what the what
Yeah.
the emissions are in an individual level. And it's not to turn that to be negative. I think it's incredibly positive, but it is the first step in many things that people can do. And I think first and foremost, look at sort of how to not emit those emissions at the very beginning, I think is very important. And I mean, we take that theme and we apply it to businesses also.
Yeah. Well, so in just 1 year, you've been able to lift off the ground such a massive and very interesting startup or company, shall I say. If you were to characterize 2020 in one word, business wise, not the pandemic or sanitizers wise, what would be that one word that you would say, yes, my 2020 was this?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think I'd probably choose insightful. I think coming along this journey, we've had to learn so much about companies and emissions and what we do about them and carbon offsets, all of these things. And I think when you're in a very early stage startup like we are, every week is sort of these new learnings that pop up. And so, we've all had time to sort of pause in this moment, and which has been useful. I think the one silver lining, I think, is we can pause and see how can we actually build a different world or economy or company to be more sustainable. I think that's one positive that's come out of the year, and I think there's a lot of really interesting and insightful things that have come up that can definitely help us. And I think we'll start seeing maybe the benefits in the next year or two or three as to what we can do around climate change as well. So both on a broader and a personal level, it's been incredibly fascinating to sort of grow on this journey over time.
What were your up to three skills that helped you progress on this journey?
I think myself and my co-founder work very well together, and I think what we've always been, which is very good, is sort of curious. So if we sort of see a problem, we sort of want to get into why that exists and what we can do about it. I think also sort of just listening. Listening skills are quite underrated, and I think we've been just listening to a lot of feedback and listening to a lot of the sort of the wider trends and seeing what we can build as a product, which I think has been really good. So curiosity, listening, and then I think just a sort of a willingness to build something. I think both of us are very passionate about actual what the product looks like. I was a product manager in my last roles, and so we've sort of combined the skills of curiosity about the problem, listening about what we can do, and then actually going out and building something. And so it's been a pleasure over the last couple of months to do that. I'm sort of looking forward to the next few months also.
Speaking of partnerships, what makes me smile now is that it's really what my husband calls, he says, why do we work so well as a couple? Because pre-selection really works. You,
Exactly.
you cannot partner with just anyone. Pre-selection, it really
Exactly.
matters.
Yeah, it's very important along that journey.
What are your plans, company plans for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, for us, what we want to do, so we sort of divide our product into measure, analyze, and reduce. So there's sort of the three sections. So on the measure side, we're sort of building out this accounting integration. We want to further advance that and use all of the company data that we can to make the most accurate estimate of a company's emissions. And then on the analyze side, I think we want to show those in very interesting ways, show how companies can reduce those emissions. And again, looking at sort of the reduction side, how do we sort of build a product that gives these companies insights over time? How can we make the offsets very sort of desirable or sort of fit for purpose for what the companies need? So we're sort of developing all of these things in tangent and or in parallel. And we're sort of hoping just to strengthen that product and build a great product for more and more customers who come through and calculate those emissions for them. So maybe in a year's time, it'd be good to see where we've gotten to and how many tons of CO2 that we are sort of capturing at that moment as well. But as I said, we've sort of got good ambitions for what we want to achieve.
Oh yeah, 1%. It only sounds small, but in fact,
Yeah, it's large.
there is a lot of things to do, and don't take it as a sprint. It's a marathon. So
Exactly.
I guess this is really important what you do. I want to thank you for this insightful conversation. I don't know if you do you have this expression in English, itchy hands? I know itchy feet means traveling, but itchy hands, we
Yeah,
say, oh, my hands are itchy. I want to start doing something.
get
I can't
involved.
wait to get back to work, sort of.
Yeah, it's a good expression.
Yeah, one last question to wrap up this interview. I always ask my guests what would be one piece of advice they would give to the listeners of Sustainability Explored.
Yes, I think for us, there's no action too small that you can do. And I think if you're both on an individual and at a company level, any action is better than no action. And I think we need everyone to join together. And again, there's no silver bullet, and we all need to sort of solve this problem in every facet of our lives. So I think the sort of the first step is the most important thing to get involved in this sort of problem.
Wonderful. Start small, start where you are.
Exactly.
Thank you, Jack. It was a delight having you on Sustainability Explored, and I wish you all the best of success with Dodo. By the way, Dodo or Dodo Eco?
Well, it's Dodo, but our website is
Dodo.
dodo.eco. Yeah.
Dodo.eco. Okay, or Dodo. In 2021 and beyond. And I will follow your your journey to see how you do by 2025.
Will do. And thanks very much for having me on. It's great to speak to you also.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers.
Well, thanks so much for taking this time to sit with us today, to listen to this episode. As always, you know what to do. If you like the episode, connect with me, connect with my guests on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, by the way. Share with anyone who you think might be interested in the episode. Another thing I wanted to say is that the new generation, those who are listening to this podcast, those who are interested in this topic, you are the ones to take these messages into the world, to push your companies to do something about CO2. And maybe really this service, dodo.eco, will be something you will want to look into in more detail. I loved speaking with Jack. I hope you liked our episode, our conversation. You can leave us a review on Podchaser or iTunes. I will reply to you in person. And yeah, finally reach out to me on LinkedIn. Challenge me with your questions, with guest suggestions, the topics you'd like me to cover in the future. This was Sustainability Explored, episode number 78, season 7, and me, your host, Anna Chashina. Thank you so much for listening, for being with us today, and until next time, next Thursday, take care, stay sustainable.